Well, good morning, fourth grade. All right, we're going to hop right into our lesson on page 386. Page 386, we're going to talk about today dividing three-digit numbers. If you remember back when we were talking about dividing two-digit numbers, I told you that the steps of division are going to be the same no matter how many digits there are in the dividend. Okay, so we're just going to keep doing the steps over and over again until the problem is gone. Okay, so remember, our first two steps are estimate, divide, then multiply, subtract, compare, bring down, start over. Estimate, divide, multiply, subtract, compare, bring down, start over. Estimate, divide, multiply, subtract, compare, bring down, start over. I did notice that in some of your homework papers that you did take my advice and turn your paper to the side so that you could keep everything in nice, neat columns. Okay, that was awesome. You don't have to do that, but if it helps you to keep everything in nice, neat columns, you can turn it over to the side, okay? Or you could turn it this way and put your name up here, or you could still put your name up here and then turn it to the side. It doesn't matter as long as it's nice and neat. Okay, so in other words, dividing three-digit numbers is going to be exactly the same as dividing two-digit numbers, except you're going to do the steps one more time. If you had a four-digit number, you would do the steps 4 times. Okay, so let's look at page 386. It says, how do you divide larger numbers? Now let's look at the key idea first. It's pretty much what I just said, that you can divide larger numbers the same way that you divide smaller numbers. Okay, so let's look at this problem. A school bus company has 273 buses and 5 parking lots. If the company wants to park the same number of buses in each lot, how many buses should be parked in each lot? Since the company wants to park the same number of buses in each lot, you can divide. Okay, those are key words. The same number in each lot tells you, okay, I'm dividing. All right, so we look at this little picture. This is the number of buses, and we need to get them into 5 different parking lots. Okay. All right, so there's a couple different ways that you can find this out. Estimating will help you find out about how many, but it won't help you find out the exact number. Okay, so find 273 divided by 5. So you could say 273 is close to 250, and 250 divided by 5 is 50. So the quotient, the answer, is going to be a little bit more than 50. Okay, but we need to find out exactly because they want to go start parking those buses. All right, so we're going to start with our steps. And so we're going to say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to divide. It says divide, step 1 says divide the tens. Now, why couldn't we put 5 into 2? The first number is 2. Well, you can't put 5 into 2, it's too big. So then you move to the next number. If you can't put it into the first number, you're going to move to the next number. So now you say to yourself, how many times does 5 go into 27? Okay, so that would be our estimating about how many times does 5 go into 27. So then 27 divided by 5, you would say, oh, 5, because 5 times 5 is 25, and 5 times 6 is 30, so 5 times 6 would be too big. So we put the number 5 up on the top over the 7 because we're dividing it into 27, okay? And then it's time to multiply. 5 times 5 is 25. So write the 25 under the 27. Look at example A. And then our next step is to subtract. So 27 minus 25 is 2. Our next step is to compare. Is 2 smaller than 5? It sure is. Okay, so now we can move to our next step, which is to bring down the next number. The next number is 3. okay? So look at step 2. It says bring down the ones and divide. Okay, so how many times does 5 go into 23? Right, 4. Okay, so we're going to put the 4 on top of the 3. Then we're going to multiply. 4 times 5 is 20. Okay, so then we're going to, I am so sorry. Then we're going to subtract. 23 minus 20 is 3. Compare. Is 3 smaller than 5? It sure is, so you divided it correctly. Okay, then there's nothing left to bring down, so our answer is 54, remainder 3. So they can put 54 in each lot, and then they have 3 left over that they're going to have to put into 3 of those lots. All right, so how do we check this? How do we check to see if it's right? Remember, you check it by doing the opposite. So we're going to multiply the quotient by the divisor and see if we get the dividend. But don't forget about the remainder. We need to add that back in after. Okay, so 54 times 5 is 270. And then we take 270 and add 3, the remainder, and it becomes 273. Now let's look at the dividend. Is it 273? It sure is. Okay, so that was correct. All right. So it says on page 377, how can you tell where to start dividing? We kind of ran into that in the last example. How do you decide where to start dividing? Well, you always start dividing at the one closest. Okay? You always start dividing at the one closest. But if this number cannot go into, sorry, I need coffee. If this number cannot go into this number because this number is too small, then you move to the next number and do the first 2 instead. Okay? Or 3, depending on what the number is. Okay, so for this particular problem, let's look. Okay, so we have our steps of division. Okay, so I said to myself, how many times does 2 go into 5? Okay, I know that 2 goes into 5 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Multiply it, 4. Then subtract. 5 minus 4 is 1. Okay, compare. 1 is smaller than 2, so I bring down the 2. How many times does 2 go into 12? 6. So 6 times 2 is 12. 12 minus 12 is 0. Okay, 0 is obviously smaller than 2. Okay, so I bring down the 1. How many times does 2 go into 1? It doesn't. It goes in 0 times. So I need to put the 0 up there because it goes in 0 times. Okay, I can't forget about that 0. 0 times 2 is 0. 1 minus 0 is 1. I compare, it's smaller. There's nothing left to bring down, so my remainder is 1. So 521 divided by 2 is 260, remainder 1. Okay, so let's move to your next lesson, which is on page, this is going to be for tomorrow or today if you're ambitious. Zeros in the quotient. We just talked about this for a second. Okay, it says, do zeros matter? They sure do. Okay, because just like in multiplication, when you have partial products, the 0 or the x saves a place. Okay, the same thing. It's going to be the same thing in dividing. The 0 in the quotient will save a space. If there are no tens, if you cannot put it in, then it's going to save the tens place because place value matters. If there's a 0 there, then it makes it so that it's a bigger number. Okay, so the key idea is the steps for dividing do not change when there are zeros in the quotient, but you have to make sure you do put the 0 in the quotient. All right, so let's look under the example. Find 435 divided by 4. Well, we know that 435 is close to 400, divided by 4 is 100. So the quotient is going to have 3 digits. So we're going to start dividing in the hundreds. All right, so let's look at the problem. Our first step is to say how many times does 4 go into 4? Well, we know it goes in 1 time. So then we multiply. 1 times 4 equals 4. Then we subtract. 4 minus 4 equals 0. Okay, so 0 is smaller than 4, so we did it correct. So then we need to bring down the 3. So look at step 2. We bring down the 3, and then we say to ourselves, okay, how many times does 4 go into 3? 0 times. Okay, so we need to put the 0 above the 3. Okay, it still matters. That 0 still matters. And then we multiply. 0 times 4 equals 0. Then we subtract. 3 minus 0 is 3. Is 3 smaller than 4? It is. So then we're going to bring down the 5. Okay, so now we have 35. How many times does 4 go into 35? 8 times. So 8 times 4 is 32. 35 minus 32 is 3. So our answer ends up being 108 remainder 3. Okay, so that 0 matters. What if we had just left it out? Then the answer would be 18 remainder 3. Okay, 108 remainder 3 is a lot different than 18 remainder 3. Those zeros do matter. They may look like nothing, but they do matter. Okay, and then to check it, you can multiply the quotient by the divisor and add the remainder. So 108 times 4 is 432. Then add the remainder, which was 3. You get 435, which is the same as the dividend. Okay? All right, so look at this guy right here. I don't know what his name is. We'll call him Bob. Look at Bob here. He says, I can use a shortcut on problems like 435 divided by 4 as long as I remember the 0 in the quotient. Okay, so instead of bringing it, multiplying it by 4 and putting the 0 and then subtracting the 0 again and then bringing down the number, which was the same as before, you can just bring down the number, but just make sure you put the 0 there. Okay, so he says, I brought down the 3 and divided. Since 3 divided by 4 is 0, remainder 3, I placed a 0 in the quotient and brought down the 5. So he just skipped the step of multiplying the 0 since it's 0. All right, so I'm so sorry. For 391, you're also going to do practice, I believe, practice A odd. So I'm going to have you do both of them, page 388 and page 391, practice A odd. Okay, so this video is less than 14 minutes long, so you have time to start before we go on Zoom. All right, bye.